For years, you may have believed that the brain inevitably slows down with age, that once you hit your 60s, the learning window basically closes, and memory decline is just something you have to accept. But the research tells a completely different story. Your brain keeps the ability to grow, rewire, and build resilience at any age, if you keep giving it the right kind of challenge. Welcome to Longevity Lab. I'm Claire.
And I'm Robert. Claire, this is one of those episodes where I already feel a little defensive because I walked in here pretty sure I knew how this story goes. Older brain, slower thinking, declining memory, maybe some crosswords to slow things down, but you're already telling me I'd been thinking about this wrong.
You are not alone, Robert. That is probably the most common brain health myth out there, and it drains hope from people way too early. The science on learning and the aging brain is actually one of the most encouraging areas in all of longevity research.
Okay, so before we get too far, I should confess something. For the past few years, I've been doing a crossword every single morning, and I've been feeling pretty good about it. Now you're going to tell me that's not enough, aren't you?
I'm not here to take away your crosswords, but I am going to complicate the story. Crosswords are fine, they're just not the same thing as building what researchers call cognitive reserve.
Cognitive reserve. That's the phrase I saw in your notes. It sounds like something a bank would sell me. What exactly is it?
Think about it like this. Imagine two men, both 75 years old. Both have similar looking brain scans with some age related changes. But one remembers names, tells detailed stories, and learns to use a new phone. The other struggles with daily tasks. Why? One answer is cognitive reserve. It's the brain's ability to improvise and find workaround routes when some cells or connections get damaged. It does not stop the underlying damage itself. It helps the brain tolerate that damage for much longer.
So it's like having a backup road when the main road is blocked.
Exactly. And here's the part that surprised me most when I first came across it. In the 1980s, researchers at Autopsy noticed something strange. Some people had brains full of the plaques and tangles that define Alzheimer's disease pathology, but they had shown almost no symptoms of dementia while they were alive.
Wait, full Alzheimer's pathology, but a normal life? How does that even work?
That question gave birth to the cognitive reserve hypothesis. The leading theory is that lifelong learning, education, and complex mental activity build denser, more flexible neural networks. When Alzheimer's pathology starts accumulating, those brains have more alternative pathways to reroute around the damage. Their symptoms are delayed for years.
So the disease may be there, but the brain just copes with it better. That's remarkable. I had no idea that could happen.
It is one of the most important findings in brain aging research, and it means we are not powerless. This is exactly why I love this topic. Psychological well being, purpose, learning, social connection, they are not fluffy extras. They are biologically protective. They change the structure and function of the brain over decades.
So this is really a physical health conversation, not just a mental health conversation.
That's the point. Mental well being is health. The brain is a physical organ. Learning is a biological process that strengthens it.
Okay, so if I want to understand this properly, where does the evidence actually come from? You mentioned autopsies, which already sounds dramatic, but I assume there's more.
There is, and one of the most famous studies is one I find myself thinking about all the time. It's called the Nun Study.
The Nun Study. You'll have to explain that.
So in 1986, a researcher named David Snowden began following a group of 678 Catholic sisters in the School Sisters of Notre Dame. What made this group so valuable is that their lives were unusually similar. They had comparable routines, diets, housing, medical care, and no smoking or heavy alcohol use. That meant researchers could look at brain aging without as many of the usual confusing variables.
It's actually quite clever. A naturally controlled study group.
Right. And one of the most striking findings came from the sisters' personal writings. When they entered the convent as young women, many had written short autobiographical essays. Decades later, researchers analyzed those essays for something called idea density, basically, how many distinct ideas were packed into each sentence.
So, not just vocabulary, the richness of thought.
Exactly. Sisters who had written with higher idea density in their 20s were significantly less likely to develop dementia in their 80s and 90s. Even more fascinating, some of those sisters had the brain pathology of Alzheimer's disease at autopsy, but they had stayed sharp while alive. Their early cognitive complexity seemed to have built a kind of buffer.
So, the way a young woman expressed herself in her 20s predicted how her brain handled aging more than half a century later. That gives me chills.
It really does. And it supports the cognitive reserve idea beautifully. Now, we have to be careful. The Nun study is observational, so it can't prove cause and effect on its own. But when you put it next to other research, the picture gets very consistent.
What kind of other research?
A large body of work has found that people with more education tend to have lower dementia risk. The 2020 Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention estimated that up to 40% of dementia cases could be connected to modifiable risk factors. Early life education is one piece, but the Commission and later updates also emphasize that cognitive activity in midlife and late life matters. So it is not only about what you did at age 25, it is also about what you keep doing at 65 and 75.
That's the part I needed to hear, because I can't go back and redo my 20s, but I can change what I do tomorrow.
Exactly, and that is the empowering center of this whole conversation.
Okay, so let me ask the question a lot of people my age are probably asking right now. If crosswords aren't enough, what actually counts?
First, I want to be clear that crosswords are not bad, but the research suggests that the brain benefits most from novelty and effort. Here's the problem with the morning crossword. After a few years, you get very good at it, your brain starts treating it like a familiar paved road. It is still active, but it is not forced to build many new routes.
So the challenge is what matters.
Yes, think of your brain like a dense old forest. If you only ever walk the same smooth path every day, that path stays clear, but the rest of the forest does not grow much. When you learn something genuinely new, especially something that feels clumsy and difficult at first, you are cutting a fresh trail. You are building new roots and new branches.
That image works for me. So the mental equivalent of walking a brand new uphill trail is better than walking a flat paved path.
Exactly. And this is where neuroplasticity comes in. Many people still believe the old idea that the adult brain cannot generate new cells or change. But we now know the brain remains plastic far longer than we used to think. Connections strengthen, weaken, and reorganize in response to experience. Learning releases neurochemicals that support the health of existing neurons and help form new synapses.
So the brain isn't a fixed machine that just wears out. It's more like a living system that responds to how we use it.
That's a much better model. There is even evidence that learning promotes the release of a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. You can think of BDNF as a kind of fertilizer for your neurons. It supports the survival of existing cells and encourages the growth of new connections.
So the more challenging learning I do, the more fertilizer I'm putting down in my brain forest.
Ha 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 ha. That is a surprisingly accurate way to put it, Robert.
Now, can I be honest about something else? For a long time, I assumed memory decline was mostly genetic. If my parents forgot names, I would too. Is that really wrong?
It is too fatalistic. Yes, genes do influence risk. Some people have a higher genetic predisposition, but cognitive reserve, physical health, sleep, hearing, social connection, and lifelong learning all shift how those genes actually play out. This is not about promising perfection, it is about widening your margins.
Widening my margins. I like that.
And here is a nuance that matters. When people hear cognitive reserve, they sometimes think it means you can prevent dementia entirely. The evidence is more subtle. What it may do is delay the appearance of symptoms. A person with greater reserve might still develop Alzheimer's pathology, but they might function well for years longer. One study of superagers found something similar.
Superagers. Now that sounds like a movie title.
It might as well be. Superagers are adults over 80 whose memory performance matches people 20 to 30 years younger. Researchers at Northwestern University have studied them. Brain scans show that superagers have thicker regions in areas related to attention and memory, and they often report being engaged in demanding mental activities throughout life.
So they're not just coasting, they're still doing hard things.
Right, and many of them report learning new skills, staying socially active, and pushing through discomfort even into their 80s and 90s.
That's such a relief because the old story says that after a certain age, you should wind down and take it easy. But this is saying the opposite. You should be ramping up the challenge, not dialing it down.
That is the real takeaway, but the type of challenge matters. Passive activities like watching documentaries, reading a light magazine, or redoing familiar puzzles are simply less potent for building reserve than activities that require active problem solving and that feel genuinely effortful.
So, what does that look like in real life? What should I actually go do?
The research points to a few practical principles. First, choose something new enough that you feel awkward at it. A language, a musical instrument, a new dance style, learning to draw, learning chess, studying a subject you have never studied before. If you are already good at it, it is maintenance, not growth.
I have been thinking about learning the piano. I played a little as a kid, but I've forgotten almost everything.
That's perfect. The early weeks of piano would force your brain to coordinate reading music, moving your fingers, listening to sound, and keeping rhythm. That's not one skill. That's a whole network of skills firing together.
So, complex tasks are better than simple ones.
Yes, complexity recruits more brain regions and builds richer connections. A group dance class is especially good because it combines motor learning, memory for sequences, music, and social interaction all at once.
Social interaction. Does that actually change brain structure, or is it just nice to have?
It does. Social engagement reduces stress, provides cognitive challenge, and is consistently linked to lower dementia risk. Loneliness is the opposite. It is a major health risk factor. One meta-analysis found that social isolation is associated with a significantly higher risk of earlier death. So when you can combine learning with social connection, you are feeding two protective systems at once.
That makes me think of my Spanish class. I've been the oldest by about 20 years, and I feel ridiculous half the time, but I always leave class more awake.
Keep going. That discomfort is actually the signal that your brain is being pushed. The research suggests that a moderate frequent dose of that kind of challenge is ideal.
What does moderate and frequent mean in practice?
For cognitive training, some studies suggest around 30 to 45 minutes of purposeful, effortful learning. 4 to 5 days per week is more effective than doing 3 hours once on a Sunday. Consistent practice builds new connections and then sleep consolidates them.
That's interesting. Sleep is part of the learning process?
Absolutely. While you sleep, the brain replays and strengthens the pathways you activated during learning. So if you are skimping on sleep, you are effectively cutting the construction process short.
So the full prescription would be something like learn a hard new skill for 30 to 45 minutes a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and then make sure you get proper sleep.
Yes, and add some physical activity. Aerobic exercise is one of the best studied ways to support brain health. Research generally recommends about 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity per week. That improves blood flow to the brain and stimulates BDNF as well.
150 minutes a week, spread over several days. So for me, that could be 5 brisk 30-minute walks. Am I doing the math right?
Yes, 5 days of 30 minutes. But if you can make those walks mentally engaging too, even better. Listen to an audio course in a new subject while walking a new route, or learn the steps of a new dance. You're layering physical and cognitive benefits.
And nutrition? I know you're a nutritionist, so I feel like you're holding something back.
Of course, diet matters for brain health, but we have a whole separate episode for that. For today, the short version is that what supports your heart also supports your brain. Think leafy greens, berries, fish, or other omega 3 sources, nuts, olive oil, and less ultra processed food. But I don't want to dilute today's message. Learning is the star here.
Okay, so can we summarize the common belief versus what science actually shows?
Common belief says the brain organically and inevitably falls apart with age, and there's not much you can do except maybe some crosswords. What science actually shows is that age related cognitive decline is much more variable than we once thought, and that cognitive reserve built through lifelong learning can delay symptoms of dementia by years.
And the mechanism?
The mechanism is that complex learning builds more synaptic connections, increases neuroplasticity, and supports the health of neural networks. When damage appears, and it might appear in many of us, the brain with higher reserve can reroute around it for much longer.
I want to make sure I'm not just hearing what I want to hear. Are there people for whom this doesn't work?
I want to be balanced. This is not a guarantee. Some people do everything right and still develop dementia. That can feel unfair, and it is. But on a population level, the evidence is strong that lifelong learning shifts the odds. And even if someone eventually develops symptoms, greater reserve can mean more years of independence and quality of life.
That's a realistic way to think about it. It's not about avoiding every problem. It's about giving yourself more good years.
Exactly. And of course, if someone is noticing significant memory changes, not just forgetting a name occasionally, but changes in daily function, getting lost in familiar places, or having trouble managing money, that is definitely a conversation to have with a doctor. We're talking about prevention and brain health, not diagnosis.
Right. Because sometimes those changes have treatable causes: thyroid issues, vitamin deficiencies, sleep apnea. I remember you telling me that once.
Yes, that's why we always recommend medical evaluation for concerning changes. But for most adults who are simply worried about aging, the message today is one of agency.
Now, I have a practical question. If I start piano this month, how long before I know it's making a difference?
The tricky part is that you usually won't feel a sudden before or after shift. The brain changes slowly. You might notice that your attention feels a little sharper, or that learning a new phone feels less overwhelming. But the real payoff is years down the road. This is a long term investment.
So it's like retirement savings. You don't feel wealthy every time you deposit, but the account is growing.
That's exactly right. And just like retirement savings, starting later is still far better than not starting at all.
I think that's the sentence I needed today. Starting later is still better than not starting.
There's also a concept researchers refer to as productive engagement. Learning that involves a purpose, tutoring someone, volunteering in a role that makes you solve new problems, mentoring, taking on a community project, seems to carry extra benefit because it combines mental challenge, social connection, and a sense of meaning.
So the ideal is a hard new skill, ideally with other people, ideally with some purpose. That sounds like a much better prescription than just doing another Sudoku.
I'm glad you didn't say crosswords again.
I'm not giving those up completely. You'll have to accept that.
Okay, fair. Just make sure they're not the only thing you do.
So let me take us back to one thing you said earlier, The Nun Study showed that early life language ability predicted late life brain health. But you also said current learning matters. Which is more important?
That is a great question. The honest answer is that both matter and they likely interact. Early life cognitive development builds a foundation, but later life learning continues to add to that reserve. Some researchers describe this as a lifelong software update. The hardware may age, but the software keeps getting more efficient.
A software update. Okay, now I understand. Every difficult new skill is like installing a new mental pathway that helps everything else run a bit longer.
Yes, and here is one more vivid body level analogy I like. Imagine your brain as a magnificent ancient tree by a still lake. The older it gets, the more branches and roots it can have. If a storm breaks a few branches, the tree does not fall because its root system is deep and wide. Lifelong learning is what deepens those roots.
Now I'm picturing that tree. It's a much nicer image than the old one of a shrinking, fading brain.
It is also more accurate. A healthy older brain is not simply a younger brain with missing parts. It is a different system with its own strengths. Older adults often have better vocabulary, better emotional regulation, and better big picture problem solving. The cliche of the wise elder exists for a reason.
That's encouraging. I feel like our culture spends so much time worrying about what older brains lose that we forget what they gain.
Yes, and that is partly why I wanted this episode to feel genuinely uplifting. Too much health content scares people into action. This topic is different. The action itself can be joyful. Learning an instrument, joining a class, studying a new language. These are not punishments. They are among the most satisfying things a person can do.
So the health behavior is also the reward.
Exactly. That is what makes lifelong learning such an elegant longevity strategy. It protects your brain while making your life more interesting.
Okay, so let's get specific. If someone listening wants to start today, what would you tell them to do?
Here is the practical, specific takeaway. Pick one activity that is genuinely new and hard for you. Not just new age, but difficult. Learning to play a musical instrument, speaking a new language, taking a structured dance class, studying a formal course in art history, or learning to code. Aim for 30 to 45 minutes, 4 to 5 days a week. Ideally, make it social. A class is better than an app alone. Then protect your sleep and add some regular aerobic movement.
What about someone who says they're too old to start something hard?
I would say that the feeling of being too old is often the myth itself. There are now many examples of people learning new languages, instruments, and professional skills in their 70s and 80s. The brain's capacity for change is lower than in childhood, but it is absolutely not zero. The science does not support the idea that you should stop challenging yourself at 60.
I'm 67, and I'm going to take that personally, in a good way.
Good. Take it as permission to be a beginner again.
Be a beginner again. That phrase feels important because as we get older, we avoid the discomfort of being bad at something. But this research says that discomfort is exactly where the benefit lives.
That is the hidden key. Many people choose activities they are already good at because it feels satisfying. But for cognitive reserve, the benefits come from the phase where you are still clumsy. That is when the brain is working hardest to build new circuits.
So the struggle is not a sign I'm too old. It's a sign I'm growing.
Beautifully said, and that is today's rule. If we had to put one sentence on a sticky note, it would be this: never stop learning, and make it novel, effortful, and social.
That's a rule I can actually follow. I'm going to call my local community college tomorrow and ask about beginner piano classes. And I'm going to stick with Spanish even on the days I feel silly.
I love that, and I will make one more note for listeners. You do not need to overhaul your entire life today. Start with one thing: one class, one instrument, one course. Consistency beats intensity. A small daily challenge repeated for years will build more reserve than a dramatic 2 week effort that fizzles out.
So, for the person on a morning run right now, the takeaway is simple. Pick one difficult new learning challenge this week, put it in your calendar like a workout, then show up, struggle a little, repeat.
Exactly. And if you have a health condition or memory concerns, talk with your doctor before making big changes. But for most people, this is one of the safest and most joyful longevity strategies there is.
Claire, I have to tell you, I expected a brain episode to be a bit frightening. Instead, I feel lighter. I actually feel excited about getting older, which is not something I thought I'd say today.
That is the whole point. Brain health is not about fearing decline, it's about building a life that keeps you alive, curious, and connected for as long as possible.
And if there's one message I want listeners to remember, it's this: your brain is not programmed to fall apart at 65. What you do with it from now on matters more than most people realize.
That's today's rule. Never stop learning and make it novel, effortful, and social.
Thanks for joining us on Longevity Lab. If this episode gave you a new way to think about your brain, subscribe and hit the bell. Then go learn something that scares you a little.
Because that discomfort is your brain growing. See you next time.